Welcome, dear listeners, to another episode here on the English Globe. We are so glad you have joined us today. Wherever you are in the world, at home, on your commute, or maybe studying, we are grateful that you are spending your valuable time with us. Our goal is always to bring you thoughtful discussions in clear English, so you can improve your listening while exploring important global issues.
That's right, Adam. And today we are diving into a very big question. Is the United States losing its global superpower status? This is a question that politicians, scholars, and citizens around the world are asking. The US has shaped global events for decades, but times are changing. The rise of new powers, economic competition, and political shifts make this topic more relevant than ever.
Exactly, Julia. Understanding this question matters for everyone, not just for Americans. If the U.S. is still the leading power, it means stability in certain areas of the world. But if its influence is declining, we might see new alliances, new conflicts, or even a new balance of global leadership. These changes could affect trade, security, technology, and even the daily lives of ordinary people around the globe.
And that's why, dear listeners, we invite you to really think with us today. As we go through this conversation, ask yourself, how do you see the role of the United States in today's world? Do you feel its power is still strong, or do you think other countries are taking the lead? Your opinion is important, and we want to hear from you after you finish listening.
Before we begin, let's take a moment to ask you a small favor. If you enjoy our discussions here on the English Globe, please like this video. That small click really helps us reach more learners and more curious minds around the world. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a future episode on important topics like this one.
Yes, and we also love connecting with you personally. Please tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Are you joining us from Asia, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, or somewhere else? It is amazing to see the variety of people who come together here to learn English while thinking deeply about world issues.
And of course, share your opinion on today's question. Is the United States losing its superpower status? Do you believe the U.S. is still leading the world? Or do you feel the balance of power is shifting toward countries like China, Russia, or others? We will be reading your comments, and maybe we will even feature some of your thoughts in future episodes.
That's a great idea, Adam. This way, our listeners are not just listening, but also joining the global conversation. So, dear listeners, get ready. In this episode, we will explore history, military power, economics, technology, culture, and politics. Together, we will examine whether the US still holds its dominant position, or if we are truly entering a new world order.
To understand today's debate, we first need to look at history. The United States was not always seen as the world's leading power. In the early 20th century, Europe dominated global affairs. But after World War II, everything changed. The U.S. came out of the war with its economy strong, its military powerful, and its influence spreading across almost every part of the world. That was the starting point of its superpower status.
Yes, Adam. While much of Europe and Asia were left destroyed by the war, America had industries, factories, and resources that were untouched. The US became the center of global trade and finance. American dollars, goods, and technologies spread around the world. From cars and airplanes to new machines, the US shaped how the modern economy looked. This economic strength gave America the foundation to lead in other areas as well.
Alongside economic power, military dominance played a huge role. By the late 1940s, the United States had built a large military force and, most importantly, it had nuclear weapons. This gave the U.S. unmatched security and leverage on the global stage. In fact, the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were a signal that the U.S. had entered a new level of military capability. This put the U.S. in a unique position compared to other nations.
Exactly. And while the Soviet Union also rose after the war, creating a bipolar world, the US had one advantage: alliances. America helped create institutions like NATO, the United Nations, and the World Bank. These organizations not only rebuilt Europe, but also kept the US at the center of global decision-making. By leading these groups, the United States showed that it wasn't just a military giant, but also a political and diplomatic leader.
And let's not forget about culture. The U.S. began to export more than just goods. It exported ideas, lifestyles, and dreams. Hollywood movies, jazz, rock and roll, and later television all carried American culture across oceans. For many people, the American way of life looked modern, free, and full of opportunities. This soft power gave the U.S. an influence that went beyond armies and weapons. It was the power to inspire.
Another important factor is the role of the dollar. After the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, the US dollar became the backbone of the global financial system. Even today, most international trade is still done in dollars. This gave America a tool of influence that no other country had. The dollar became not just money, but a symbol of trust and stability in the world economy. That economic leverage is still a key part of US power.
But we should also note that U.S. power wasn't always welcomed. During the Cold War, America faced strong opposition from the Soviet Union. Proxy wars, nuclear tensions, and ideological competition created decades of rivalry. Yet, despite the Soviet challenge, the U.S. managed to keep its alliances strong, maintain its economy, and project its influence worldwide. By the end of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. stood alone as the dominant superpower.
That moment in the 1990s is often called the unipolar moment. For about 2 decades, the US had no serious rival. It led interventions in the Middle East, expanded NATO, promoted free trade, and pushed globalization. Many people thought American power would last forever, but as history teaches us, no empire or power stays at the top forever. That is why today, many ask if the US is entering a stage of decline or transformation.
So, listeners, the history shows us 2 things. First, the U.S. became a superpower because of economic growth, military strength, global institutions, and cultural influence. Second, this position was never completely secure. It was always tested by rivals, from the Soviet Union to rising economies. That's why the question of American power is not just about today, but also about the lessons of the past.
Absolutely, Adam. To decide if the US is losing its superpower status, we have to remember how it gained that status in the first place. History gives us the foundation to understand the present. In our next part, we'll dive into one of the most visible symbols of US power, its military strength and its role as a global security leader.
When people think about U.S. power, the first thing that comes to mind is often its military. For decades, the United States has had the most advanced, the most expensive, and the most global military presence of any nation in history. With over 700 military bases around the world and a defense budget larger than the next several countries combined, it is clear that America has invested heavily in being not just a regional power but a global one.
Yes, and those numbers really show how far-reaching American influence is. The Pentagon budget for defense in recent years has been close to $1 trillion, an amount so large that it is almost impossible to compare. This spending funds aircraft carriers, fighter jets, nuclear submarines, satellites, cyber tools, and a professional army that is trained and deployed in nearly every continent. For many decades, this unmatched capacity gave the US the role of global policeman.
That role has been both respected and criticized. Supporters argue that without the U.S. military presence, many regions would fall into chaos or face aggression from stronger neighbors. For example, in Europe, American troops have long been seen as the backbone of NATO. In Asia, the presence of U.S. forces in South Korea and Japan is a guarantee of security against North Korea or even China. In the Middle East, American forces have shaped the balance of power for decades.
But critics say that this presence sometimes creates more problems than it solves. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are the strongest examples. The US spent trillions of dollars, lost thousands of lives, and still failed to bring lasting stability. For many people around the world, those wars made America look less like a protector and more like an occupier. They raised doubts about whether American military power can truly solve complex political and cultural conflicts.
That's an important point. Military power can bring destruction quickly, but building peace and stability requires more than weapons. The US found this out the hard way in places like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Even with advanced technology, intelligence networks, and allies, the military could not achieve clear long-term victories. This shows the limits of even the most powerful armed forces in history.
At the same time, we should not underestimate the continuing strength of the US military. America still operates a nuclear arsenal capable of destroying any opponent. It has 11 aircraft carriers, while most other countries have one or none. Its Air Force and Navy remain unmatched in reach and sophistication. And its ability to project power quickly across the globe is still something no other nation can truly match today.
True, but the question we must ask is sustainability. Can the US continue to spend nearly $1 trillion every year on defense, while also managing a growing national debt and domestic challenges? Many economists say this spending is not sustainable in the long run. Rising powers like China are increasing their military budgets too, though still far behind America's. Over time, the gap may shrink, especially if US spending slows down.
And China's rise is especially significant. With its focus on the South China Sea, advanced missile systems, and modern naval forces, China is directly challenging US influence in Asia. Russia, too, though smaller in economy, has shown in Ukraine and Syria that it can project power in ways that test American responses. The idea that the US can intervene anywhere without challenge is no longer as true as it was 20 or 30 years ago.
Another dimension is technology and cyber warfare. The battlefield is no longer only about tanks and jets. It is about satellites, digital networks, artificial intelligence, and even space. While the US is still strong in these areas, rivals are catching up. Cyber attacks on American institutions and infrastructure have already shown that no system is completely safe. Military power in the 21st century is not just physical, but digital, and this is where the balance may be shifting.
And let's not forget the question of credibility. Military power is not only about hardware, it is also about perception. If allies believe the US will defend them, that strengthens deterrence. But if allies begin to doubt American promises, then even a strong military becomes less effective. Some NATO members have recently worried about whether the US is fully committed, especially during times of political division inside America. That uncertainty can weaken the US role as security leader.
Exactly. In fact, credibility is one of the biggest concerns. For example, when the US withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, many allies were surprised and disappointed. The images of chaos at the Kabul airport raised questions about American reliability. Critics argued that this damaged US credibility not only in the Middle East, but also in Asia and Europe. If friends and rivals alike think America cannot be counted on, then its military strength loses some of its global influence.
On the other hand, we should acknowledge that no other country has the kind of global alliance network that the United States has. NATO in Europe, partnerships in Asia, and various defense agreements give America a web of allies who share intelligence, provide bases, and support military actions. This global network multiplies American strength and makes it far more powerful than it would be standing alone.
That's a great point. Alliances are force multipliers, and they are one reason the US military still stands above others. But alliances also require trust and responsibility. If the U.S. loses moral or political credibility, those alliances might weaken. This is why the military debate cannot be separated from diplomacy, economy, or culture. Power in today's world is interconnected, and a strong army is not enough if the other elements of leadership are missing.
So where does this leave us? The US military remains the most advanced and far-reaching in the world, but its use in recent decades has shown both strengths and weaknesses. Its ability to project force is unmatched, yet its ability to create lasting stability is limited. Rivals are catching up in certain areas, especially technology, and sustainability is a growing question. All of these factors make the debate over American superpower status even more complex.
Listeners, this is where we invite you to think carefully. Do you believe military strength alone is enough to keep America as a superpower? Or do you think the world is already shifting toward a balance where no single country can dominate by military force alone? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective adds so much to our global discussion.
Yes, please do. We are always inspired by the variety of ideas from our listeners. Some of you live in countries where the US military presence is strong. Others live in regions where rival powers are growing. Your experiences give us insight into how power is felt on the ground. So tell us, do you feel safer because of US military strength? Or do you see it as something that creates tension?
In our next part, we will leave the battlefield and turn to the economy, another pillar of superpower status. We will look at whether the U.S. still dominates the global economy, or if its position is being challenged by new giants, especially China. Stay with us as we explore the financial power that shapes the future of nations. Now that we've talked about the military side of American power, we have to move to the other pillar of superpower status, the economy. For decades, the United States has had the largest and most influential economy in the world. From Wall Street in New York to Silicon Valley in California, the U.S. economy has shaped global markets, created international financial rules, and powered industries that affect every part of daily life.
That's right. When we look at economic dominance, the numbers are important. For many years, the United States has held the top position in terms of gross domestic product, or GDP. Even today, the American economy is worth more than $25 trillion. That's an amount greater than the economies of many major countries combined. And what's more, the US dollar remains the most trusted and widely used currency in global trade and finance.
The dollar is absolutely central to America's economic power. Because oil, gas, and most international goods are priced in dollars, other countries must hold reserves of U.S. currency. This creates constant demand for the dollar, and it gives Washington a unique tool to influence global trade. It also makes U.S. sanctions powerful. When America cuts off a country from the dollar system, it is not just a political action. It can be an economic weapon that reshapes entire economies.
Yes, and sanctions have become one of the most widely used tools of US foreign policy. Countries like Iran, North Korea, and Russia have all experienced how painful it can be to lose access to the dollar-based global market. For allies, too, the dollar provides stability. Many governments trust the US banking system more than their own. This makes America not just a major player in trade, but also the center of the global financial order.
But here comes the big question. How long can this last? China has risen at incredible speed. Just 40 years ago, it was still a mostly poor rural economy. Today, it is the world's second largest economy and could overtake the U.S. in absolute size in the coming decades. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China is investing in infrastructure and trade routes across Asia, Africa, and Europe. This strategy increases its influence and challenges U.S. economic dominance.
Exactly. And while China is the most obvious competitor, it is not alone. Other players like India, with its growing population and tech sector, and the European Union, with its large internal market, also represent economic weight. These rising or established powers create a world where the US no longer has the stage to itself. Instead, we see more competition, more voices, and more debates about who sets the rules of trade and finance.
Another issue is debt. The United States carries a national debt of more than $30 trillion. While investors still buy U.S. Treasury bonds because they see America as safe, this level of debt creates questions about long-term stability. Can the U.S. keep borrowing forever? Will this reduce its ability to invest in education, infrastructure, or new industries? These are questions economists and political leaders are asking around the world.
And trade wars also add pressure. In recent years, we have seen America engage in tariff battles, especially with China. The idea was to protect U.S. industries, but trade wars often raise prices and reduce efficiency. At the same time, globalization is shifting. Some companies are moving production to countries like Vietnam, India, or Mexico. This shows that the world economy is not just about U.S. factories anymore. It is about a network of countries working together.
True, and let's also remember innovation. The U.S. has been the leader in technology and creativity, producing companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Tesla, and Amazon. These companies shape how the world communicates, buys, sells, and entertains itself. But here, too, the U.S. faces growing competition. China has developed companies like Huawei, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance. These companies are not only strong inside China, but are expanding into other parts of the world.
So in the economic field, we see both continuity and change. The continuity is that the US dollar remains the strongest currency, American companies still dominate global markets, and US innovation keeps pushing the world forward. The change is that competitors are stronger than ever before, supply chains are shifting, and trust in America's economic leadership is being questioned by some. It is a balance between strength and vulnerability.
And listeners, we want to ask you, what does economic power mean in your life? Do you use the US dollar in your country? Do American companies provide the technology, food, or services you use every day? Or do you see more influence from other countries in your markets? Your answers will help us understand how US economic power feels in daily life around the world.
That's a wonderful question, Adam. Because sometimes when we talk about economics, it sounds abstract. Numbers, GDP, percentages. But actually, it is about daily realities. The phone you use, the clothes you wear, the price of oil or bread, even the apps on your screen. All of these are shaped by global trade, and America plays a role in almost all of them. This is why US economic power is not just a topic for experts. It touches everyone.
At the same time, we should think about the risks if America's economy weakens. If the dollar loses its central role, or if another country sets the financial rules, then global trade might look very different. Inflation, currency instability, or financial crises could spread more quickly. The global economy depends on a certain degree of American leadership. So when we ask if the U.S. is losing superpower status, economics is at the heart of the question.
Well said. And as we close this section, let's highlight the key takeaway. The US still holds massive economic power, but it faces rising challenges. China, India, and others are not just following, they are competing. Trade is shifting, debt is growing, and trust is sometimes questioned. Whether the US can maintain its superpower role will depend on how it adapts to these realities in the years ahead.
In the next section, we'll move from economics to politics. We'll ask, is the U.S. still the global leader in diplomacy and international cooperation, or is its political influence shrinking as new powers rise? Stay with us as we continue exploring this vital question. Beyond the military and the economy, another core element of superpower status is political influence. The ability to shape global decisions, to set rules, and to guide international cooperation has always been central to American power. For decades, the U.S. has positioned itself as the leader of the free world, promoting democracy, human rights, and international institutions. But today, we have to ask if that role is still as strong as it once was.
That's a good starting point, Adam. When we look back to the period after World War II, the US was at the heart of building the international system. It supported the creation of the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and NATO. These organizations became symbols of global cooperation, and they were often shaped by American values and leadership. In many ways, the world order that we know today is the result of American initiative and vision.
Exactly. But leadership is not just about creating institutions, it is also about guiding them through challenges. For example, during the Cold War, the US managed to keep NATO united despite strong pressures. In the 1990s, it led international coalitions during the Gulf War and humanitarian interventions in the Balkans. These actions reinforced the idea that Washington was not just a participant in world affairs, but the central actor in deciding outcomes.
Yet over time, things began to change. The US made choices that some countries saw as unilateral or even arrogant. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 is one clear example. Many allies, including France and Germany, opposed the war, but the US went forward anyway. That decision created tensions with longtime partners and led to debates about whether America was still acting as a responsible leader or simply pursuing its own interests.
And that is where credibility again comes into the discussion. Political leadership depends on trust. Allies need to believe that the US will respect international law, consult with partners, and keep its commitments. But when Washington makes decisions without consensus, it weakens that trust. Some countries begin to wonder if they should rely less on America and more on regional or global alternatives. This dynamic is central to the question of declining US leadership.
Another factor is the rise of multipolarity. We no longer live in a world where one or two powers dominate. Instead, we see multiple centers of influence: the European Union, China, Russia, India, Brazil, and regional blocs like ASEAN or the African Union. These actors do not always agree with US positions, and they sometimes create alternative institutions like the BRICS Bank or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This diversity makes US leadership more complicated.
And inside the US itself, political divisions have also affected its global image. The last decade has shown deep polarization between political parties. Changes in leadership sometimes create sudden shifts in foreign policy. For example, one administration might sign a climate agreement, while the next one withdraws. This inconsistency can confuse allies and make them question whether America's commitments will last beyond the next election cycle.
That inconsistency is a serious problem. Leadership requires stability. Countries like Japan, Germany, or Canada want to know that when they make agreements with the US, those agreements will be honored over time. If the US keeps changing its positions on key issues, like climate, trade, or security, then its partners may start looking for more reliable arrangements elsewhere. This weakens the perception of Washington as the steady hand of global politics.
At the same time, we cannot ignore the strengths the US still holds. Despite divisions, America remains the most influential voice in institutions like NATO and the UN Security Council. Its diplomatic network is the largest in the world, with embassies and consulates in nearly every country. American negotiators often play central roles in peace talks, arms control discussions, and international treaties. That level of diplomatic reach is still unmatched.
True. And another strength is the appeal of American values. Many people around the world continue to admire democracy, free speech, and individual rights, principles that the US has long promoted. Even when America does not fully live up to these ideals at home, they remain powerful symbols abroad. This kind of soft power allows the US to influence political debates without using force, simply by representing ideas that many people find inspiring.
But we should also recognize the challenges to that soft power. In recent years, global surveys have shown declining trust in American leadership. Some of this comes from foreign policy decisions, like wars or sanctions. Some comes from domestic issues, like political polarization, racial tensions, or attacks on democratic institutions. When people see problems inside the U.S., they sometimes question whether Washington has the right to promote values abroad.
That's very true. Leadership requires not just strength but also legitimacy. The US must show that it can solve its own problems if it wants to inspire others. If domestic divisions grow too deep, or if democracy appears weak, then the political influence of the US abroad will be limited. In this way, America's internal health is directly connected to its external leadership. The world is watching closely, and perceptions matter as much as reality.
Another issue we should discuss is U.S. relations with allies. For decades, Europe was the closest partner, but now Europe is seeking more independence in defense and trade. In Asia, Japan and South Korea rely on the U.S., but are also building stronger ties with other partners. Even in the Middle East, some countries are balancing American influence with closer ties to China or Russia. This shows a more complex picture of global leadership today.
And we cannot forget about rivals. China is building its own network of influence through trade, investment, and diplomacy. Russia uses energy and military power to shape outcomes in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. These countries challenge US positions in the UN and other forums, creating a multipolar environment where America is no longer the unquestioned leader. The competition is not only military or economic, but also political.
So, listeners, when we ask if the U.S. is losing its superpower status, political leadership is at the heart of the debate. America still has unmatched resources, allies, and institutions, but it faces rising competition, declining trust, and internal divisions that complicate its role. Whether the U.S. can adapt and maintain leadership will depend on its ability to rebuild credibility and cooperate in a multipolar world.
That's the key point, Adam. Superpower status is not only about strength. It is about influence, trust, and the ability to lead others toward shared goals. The US still has enormous capacity, but whether it can continue to lead in a changing world remains an open question. And that is why this discussion is so important for all of us.
Dear listeners, we want to hear from you. Do you believe the U.S. is still the political leader of the world? Or do you think other powers are taking that role? How do you see America's role in international institutions where you live? Please share your thoughts in the comments and let us know your perspective.
In the next part, we will shift from politics to technology and innovation, another crucial area of superpower status. We will ask, does the US still lead in science, technology, and cyberpower? Or is that leadership also being challenged? Stay with us as we continue this journey into the complex question of American influence.
When we talk about superpower status today, military and economy are not enough. Technology and innovation are now at the center of global influence. The United States has long been the leader in these areas. Silicon Valley produces groundbreaking technologies, American universities lead in research, and companies like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Tesla shape how people live and work around the world. This technological dominance is a core part of America's global influence.
Absolutely, Adam. Technology is not just about consumer products. It is about strategic power. Innovations in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, space exploration, and quantum computing determine not only economic growth, but also military strength. The US has led in these areas for decades, giving it an edge over rivals. American innovation influences international standards, sets global expectations, and shapes the development paths of other countries.
But the landscape is changing, Julia. China, for example, has invested heavily in technology over the last 20 years. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, and ByteDance are not only strong domestically, but also expanding globally. China is leading in areas like 5G infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and high-speed rail. These advances reduce the technological gap that once separated the U.S. from potential competitors and challenge American leadership in global innovation.
That's very true. And it is not only China. Other countries, including South Korea, India, and the European Union, are making significant technological advances. South Korea dominates semiconductors, Germany leads in engineering, and India excels in software services. The US still has a strong lead in many areas, but technological dominance is no longer guaranteed. The global balance of innovation is becoming more distributed, which affects America's influence on international policy and economic standards.
Another dimension of modern power is cyber capabilities. Today, conflicts are not only fought on land, sea, or air, but also in cyberspace. The United States has extensive cyber intelligence and defense programs, making it capable of monitoring, protecting, and sometimes disrupting networks worldwide. But cyber threats are evolving rapidly. Russia, China, North Korea, and even smaller actors have shown they can launch attacks that threaten government agencies, financial systems, and infrastructure, which complicates the U.S. position as a technological leader.
Exactly, Adam. Cybersecurity is a global challenge, and no nation is fully immune. Even with the most advanced technology, the US faces constant threats. This means that maintaining technological superiority requires continuous investment, innovation, and international collaboration. The speed of development is crucial. Falling behind even slightly in AI, semiconductors, or cyber defense can quickly reduce strategic advantages. Technology today moves faster than any traditional measure of power.
Space exploration is another area that defines superpower capability. For decades, America led in space technology, from the Apollo missions to the International Space Station. NASA, private companies like SpaceX, and collaborations with international partners have reinforced U.S. leadership in orbit. Yet, new players like China and India are achieving milestones in space, from lunar missions to satellite navigation systems. This creates competition that did not exist during the Cold War, signaling that technological leadership is no longer guaranteed.
And innovation isn't just about competition. It also drives economic and military power. Countries that lead in high-tech sectors attract global talent, investment, and influence. America continues to draw engineers, researchers, and entrepreneurs from around the world, strengthening its innovative capacity. However, immigration restrictions, domestic political debates, and global competition for talent could reduce this advantage over time. Maintaining a technological edge requires a combination of policy, resources, and social stability.
Another important factor is intellectual property. American companies have long controlled patents, software, and research publications, giving the U.S. leverage in trade negotiations and global standards. But rivals are catching up, filing more patents and building research capacity domestically. China, for example, has made intellectual property a key focus of its development plans. This shift could gradually reduce U.S. influence in critical technologies and decision-making on global tech standards.
And we must also consider digital platforms and communication. Social media companies, search engines, and cloud services headquartered in the US have a global reach unmatched by any other country. They shape information, commerce, and culture worldwide. Yet they face challenges from regulation, competition from foreign companies, and questions about privacy and control. How the US manages these companies will affect both domestic power and international perception.
So, in summary, technological and cyber power remain central to American superpower status. The U.S. still leads in many high-tech sectors and continues to influence global standards. However, rivals are rising, cyber threats are growing, and technological leadership requires constant investment, policy attention, and global collaboration. The competition is no longer just about weapons or money. It is about knowledge, innovation, and the ability to adapt faster than others.
Listeners, this section shows that technology is both a strength and a vulnerability for the US. Its innovative capacity gives America global influence, but new competitors and rapid developments create uncertainty. As we continue exploring US power, remember that military and economy alone do not define superpower status today. Innovation, technology, and cyber capabilities are equally crucial.
In our next section, we will move from technology to culture, which is another pillar of American influence. We'll ask whether Hollywood, music, sports, and education still give the U.S. soft power that other countries cannot match. Stay with us as we continue exploring what makes a superpower in the 21st century. When we talk about superpower status today, we cannot ignore culture. Military strength, economic power, and technological innovation are important, but cultural influence, often called soft power, is equally significant. The United States has long shaped global culture through movies, music, television, fashion, and even social norms. Hollywood, for example, has spread American stories and ideals worldwide, influencing generations of people far beyond U.S. borders.
Absolutely, Adam. From jazz and rock music to Hollywood blockbusters and social media trends, American culture has been exported globally for decades. This soft power allows the US to influence opinions, lifestyles, and even political ideas without military intervention or economic coercion. Many young people around the world grow up with American films, apps, and brands, which creates familiarity and admiration for the country's culture and values.
And it's not just entertainment. American universities, research institutions, and professional networks have shaped global education standards. Students from around the world come to study in the United States, learning not just knowledge, but also social norms, communication skills, and innovation practices. These students often return home with a positive view of American society, further extending the country's cultural and intellectual influence.
Exactly. But cultural influence also interacts with politics and economics. For instance, American media often portrays democracy, freedom of speech, and individual rights as ideal. This has inspired movements in other countries and shaped international debates on governance. At the same time, global brands like Coca-Cola, Nike, and Apple carry American identity, which reinforces a perception of America as modern, innovative, and desirable.
However, cultural influence is not unlimited. Critics argue that American culture can sometimes be perceived as intrusive or dominant, which can lead to backlash. In some countries, there is concern that local traditions and industries are overshadowed by Hollywood films, American fashion, or fast food chains. This tension shows that soft power must be exercised carefully. Influence depends on admiration, not coercion, or it may provoke resistance.
That's very true. Another factor is digital culture. Social media platforms, most of which are American, have a massive global reach. Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter shape global trends in communication, entertainment, and even politics. They allow American ideas and norms to spread instantly. But these platforms also face criticism over privacy, misinformation, and monopolistic practices, which can affect how people perceive the United States.
And we should also consider sports and lifestyle. Major U.S. leagues like the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball have international fans. American sports culture promotes ideals of competition, teamwork, and achievement. Similarly, lifestyle trends promoted by American media, from fashion to tech gadgets, create a perception of America as modern and aspirational. This contributes to global perception in a way few other nations can match.
But global perception is complex. While many admire US culture, others see it as dominating or even morally questionable. Controversies related to foreign policy, social inequality, and domestic politics sometimes damage America's image abroad. Surveys indicate that approval of US leadership varies greatly by region and issue. Cultural influence remains strong, but it is increasingly challenged by alternative narratives from China, Europe, and regional powers.
And let's not forget language. English has become the global lingua franca, and much of this is linked to US influence. American media, education, and international business use English extensively, reinforcing cultural connections. People around the world learn English to access technology, science, and entertainment, which indirectly spreads American norms, ideas, and perspectives, creating an enduring form of soft power.
Another dimension is tourism and travel. Millions of people visit the United States each year for education, business, or leisure. Experiencing American culture firsthand, its cities, national parks, universities, and lifestyle, leaves a strong impression. These experiences can build positive associations, strengthen cultural ties, and create networks of people who feel connected to the United States long after they return home.
So when we look at cultural influence, the US still maintains a major advantage. Its movies, music, education, sports, and technology create admiration, familiarity, and connectivity worldwide. Yet, cultural influence is subtle and fragile. It can be enhanced by values, innovation, and respect for local traditions, or it can be weakened by political missteps, global criticism, or overreach. In today's world, soft power is as essential as military or economic power.
Listeners, culture might feel less tangible than armies or GDP numbers, but it shapes perceptions, alliances, and trust. Countries that admire American culture may support its policies, buy its products, or adopt its ideas. But cultural influence can also wane if alternatives become more appealing. For example, Chinese media, Bollywood films, K-pop, and European fashion are offering global audiences more choices than ever before, challenging US dominance.
And that is why cultural influence is so central to the discussion of superpower status. It is not enough to have the strongest military or largest economy. How people around the world see America matters greatly. Positive perception encourages cooperation, builds soft power, and creates global networks that reinforce US leadership in subtle but powerful ways.
As we conclude this section, the key takeaway is that cultural influence remains a major pillar of American global power, but it faces rising competition and increasing scrutiny. Movies, music, education, language, and digital culture continue to shape perceptions worldwide, but other nations are creating alternatives that could gradually reduce the dominance of American soft power.
In the next section, we will analyze the challenges and threats facing US global power. From rising rivals to domestic divisions, we'll explore why some experts argue that America's superpower status may be declining. Stay with us as we move into a discussion of the obstacles that could reshape the 21st century world order. While the United States continues to hold enormous power across military, economy, technology, and culture, it is important to examine the growing challenges that threaten its superpower status. No nation, no matter how strong, is immune to shifts in global dynamics. Rising competitors, geopolitical tensions, domestic political divisions, and economic vulnerabilities all pose significant risks to America's continued dominance. Understanding these challenges is key to assessing the future of global leadership.
Exactly, Adam. Let's start with rising competitors. China, as we have discussed, is rapidly increasing its influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond through trade, technology, and infrastructure initiatives. Russia, though economically smaller, is strategically assertive, using military actions and energy resources to shape outcomes in Europe and the Middle East. These countries actively challenge US policies, signaling that America is no longer the uncontested global authority.
Another major challenge is domestic political division. In recent years, Deep polarization between political parties has weakened policy consistency, disrupted foreign relations, and created uncertainty among allies. International partners may question whether the United States can maintain long-term commitments or whether policy could change dramatically after each election cycle. This internal instability can directly affect global perception of U.S. reliability and leadership.
Economic vulnerabilities are also significant. Although the U.S. economy is massive, it faces growing national debt, inflation pressures, and dependence on global supply chains. High debt levels limit flexibility in domestic spending and international investments. Additionally, global competition for markets, technology, and resources is intensifying. If the U.S. fails to adapt economically, its ability to exert influence through trade and finance could decline over time.
Geopolitical challenges further complicate the picture. Conflicts in regions like the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and the South China Sea test America's military reach and diplomatic capacity. The U.S. cannot be present everywhere simultaneously, and overextension of resources can reduce effectiveness. Meanwhile, adversaries are learning to exploit vulnerabilities through asymmetric strategies, cyber warfare, and regional alliances that bypass traditional American influence.
Cybersecurity is another growing threat. In today's interconnected world, power is not only measured by tanks or aircraft carriers, but also by the ability to protect networks, data, and critical infrastructure. State and non-state actors are increasingly capable of cyber attacks that disrupt economies, manipulate information, and challenge national security. Even with advanced U.S. cyber capabilities, the risk of being outmaneuvered in this domain is real and growing.
Global public perception also matters. Soft power, as we discussed in the previous section, can decline if the world views U.S. policies or culture negatively. Controversial foreign interventions, human rights criticisms, and internal unrest can reduce admiration and trust abroad. When nations and populations question America's legitimacy as a global leader, even superior military or economic power can be less effective in achieving international goals.
Technological competition adds yet another layer. America's edge in AI, quantum computing, biotech, and cyber tools is being challenged by rivals who invest heavily in research and innovation. Falling behind in these sectors could reduce both economic and military influence. Technology moves quickly, and even temporary lapses in leadership can have long-term consequences for global competitiveness and national security.
Climate change and environmental challenges also play a role. Natural disasters, rising sea levels, and energy transitions impact economic stability, military operations, and global influence. The U.S. must coordinate domestic policies with international commitments. Failure to lead on global environmental issues could reduce credibility and give other nations opportunities to fill leadership gaps in sustainable technologies and global initiatives.
All of these factors combine to create a complex landscape of challenges. Rising powers, domestic divisions, economic pressures, cyber threats, and environmental issues interact in ways that can weaken U.S. global influence if left unaddressed. Experts argue that without strategic adaptation, these challenges could slowly erode the advantages that have kept America at the top of the global hierarchy for decades.
At the same time, challenges do not automatically mean decline. They represent tests that require careful management, foresight, and adaptation. Historically, superpowers have faced competition, crises, and domestic difficulties, yet strong leadership, innovation, and diplomacy can help maintain influence even in turbulent times. The question for the U.S. is whether it can respond effectively to these 21st century challenges.
Listeners, we want to hear your thoughts. Which of these challenges do you see as the most threatening to U.S. power, rising global competitors, domestic issues, or economic pressures? How do you perceive America's ability to adapt and respond to these threats from where you are listening? Your opinions give us valuable insight into how people around the world view U.S. superpower status.
Exactly, Julia. Understanding the challenges is crucial because they shape the possibilities for the future. If the U.S. can strengthen alliances, invest strategically in technology and infrastructure, and maintain credibility abroad, it may continue to exert global influence. But ignoring or underestimating these threats could lead to a gradual reduction in its superpower standing.
In the next section, we will explore the future outlook for America. We will consider scenarios in which the U.S. maintains leadership, faces decline, or shares power with other nations in a multipolar world. Stay with us as we analyze what the coming decades might look like for the world's most talked about superpower.
As we explore the future of global power, one major trend we see is the rise of a multipolar world. For decades, the United States held clear dominance, shaping international politics, trade, and security. But today, the international system is increasingly distributed among several major powers. China, the European Union, India, and regional blocs are asserting influence, creating a world where power is no longer concentrated in one nation. This shift raises important questions about America's continued superpower status.
Exactly, Adam. In a multipolar world, no single nation can dictate global outcomes alone. Countries must negotiate, collaborate, and sometimes compromise more than ever before. Alliances are becoming more fluid, and regional actors are gaining greater autonomy. For the United States, this means that leadership is not about unilateral action, but about building coalitions, understanding diverse perspectives, and finding areas of mutual interest with multiple partners.
This transformation also affects economic power. While the U.S. still holds the largest economy, emerging powers are gaining ground. China's rapid industrial growth, India's expanding technology sector, and the European Union's trade networks challenge America's dominance. Global financial influence may become more shared, with countries experimenting with alternative currencies, regional trade agreements, and independent supply chains. The U.S. will need to adapt to maintain influence in a more complex economic landscape.
And the military dimension is evolving as well. American armed forces remain the most capable and technologically advanced, but rising powers like China and Russia are modernizing their militaries, investing in cyber, missile, and space capabilities. Regional powers are also increasing their defense spending and cooperation. This creates a security environment where the U.S. cannot act alone, and strategic decisions must consider multiple actors with competing interests.
Technology and innovation will be critical in this multipolar future. While the U.S. has long led in areas like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and aerospace, other nations are rapidly closing the gap. Maintaining technological superiority will require continuous investment in research, education, and international collaboration. It is not only about creating new technologies, but also about shaping global standards and ensuring interoperability with allies.
Soft power and culture remain important in this new world. America's cultural influence is still strong, from Hollywood and music to education and digital platforms. Yet, other nations are promoting their own cultural products globally. K-pop, European cinema, and Chinese media are gaining audiences worldwide. The US will need to combine its cultural appeal with credible policy and leadership to retain its influence in shaping global norms and values.
Global governance is another critical area. The world faces transnational challenges like climate change, pandemics, and cybersecurity threats. In a multipolar system, no single nation can lead alone. Cooperation is essential. The United States will need to engage with emerging powers, regional organizations, and multilateral institutions to tackle these problems effectively. Leadership will be judged not just by power, but by the ability to build consensus and coordinate global solutions.
And domestic strength will remain central. The US must address internal challenges like political polarization, social inequality, and economic disparities to maintain credibility abroad. A stable, prosperous, and united country is more capable of leading internationally. Conversely, domestic weakness can embolden competitors, reduce trust among allies, and limit America's ability to project power and influence global outcomes.
For listeners, it is important to understand that a multipolar world is not necessarily negative for the U.S. It presents both challenges and opportunities. By embracing cooperation, innovation, and strategic diplomacy, America can remain a leading actor while sharing influence with other powers. Leadership in this context means guiding, persuading, and building partnerships rather than dominating.
This future also emphasizes adaptability. Countries that can adjust to new realities, invest in their strengths, and collaborate internationally are likely to thrive. For the US, this means not only maintaining military and economic strength, but also being flexible in diplomacy, responsive to global concerns, and proactive in technology, culture, and environmental leadership. Superpower status in the 21st century is as much about influence and perception as raw strength.
Listeners, consider this scenario. The U.S. continues to lead in military, economy, and innovation, but China, India, and the EU also grow stronger and more independent. In this world, American leadership is shared, decisions are negotiated, and global power is more distributed. This multipolar system may be more stable in some ways, but it also requires skill, collaboration, and vision to navigate effectively.
In conclusion, the future is neither predetermined nor simple. The US faces a world of rising powers, shared responsibilities, and complex global challenges. Its superpower status is evolving rather than disappearing. How the US adapts to this multipolar world, strengthens alliances, invests in technology, and maintains credibility abroad will determine whether it remains a central leader in global affairs for decades to come.
In the next and final section, we will summarize everything we have discussed and provide a clear analysis. Is the U.S. truly losing its superpower status? Or is it transitioning into a new form of leadership that fits a more interconnected, multipolar world? Stay with us for the conclusion. As we reach the conclusion of today's discussion, it is clear that evaluating U.S. superpower status is not simple. The United States still possesses unmatched military capabilities, a massive and innovative economy, advanced technology, and enduring cultural influence. However, rising global competitors, domestic divisions, and shifting geopolitical realities mean that American dominance is no longer guaranteed. The question is not whether the U.S. has power, but how it uses it in a changing world.
Exactly, Adam. Superpower status is evolving. The US may not hold the unquestioned global authority it enjoyed in the 20th century, but it still has immense tools of influence. Leadership today is less about unilateral decisions and more about coalition building, soft power, and adaptability. The world is increasingly multipolar, with China, the European Union, India, and regional actors asserting influence in ways that require the US to share power while maintaining credibility and innovation.
Economic strength remains a cornerstone of U.S. influence, but it is being challenged by new global powers and regional trade networks. Maintaining leadership requires not only protecting markets and investments but also encouraging technological innovation and intellectual property development. The United States must invest strategically, ensuring it stays ahead in critical areas like AI, biotechnology, and renewable energy to retain its competitive edge in the global economy.
Military power continues to be a key factor, but the nature of global conflict is changing. Cybersecurity, space capabilities, and asymmetric warfare mean that traditional measures of strength are no longer sufficient alone. America must integrate technology, intelligence, and strategy while working with allies to address complex threats. The US cannot act alone, and its ability to cooperate internationally will determine how effective its military strength remains in shaping global outcomes.
Soft power and cultural influence are also crucial. American movies, music, universities, and social media platforms continue to spread values, ideas, and innovation worldwide. These elements shape perception, build alliances, and create admiration without force. Yet, cultural influence faces competition from other countries, digital platforms, and alternative global narratives. Maintaining soft power requires credibility, respect for global perspectives, and an ongoing commitment to the values the U.S. projects internationally.
Domestic stability is another central factor. Political polarization, social inequality, and economic disparities directly affect global perception and the US's ability to lead. Countries around the world watch how America handles its internal challenges. Strength at home reinforces leadership abroad, while domestic weakness can embolden competitors and reduce trust among allies. For the US to maintain superpower status, addressing internal issues is just as important as managing external threats.
Geopolitical and strategic threats, such as the rise of China and regional assertiveness by Russia, India, and other powers, create a more complex global landscape. America's influence is no longer absolute, and strategic adaptation is critical. Leadership will require balancing competition and cooperation, projecting strength while building partnerships, and responding to global challenges like climate change, pandemics, and technological disruption in a collaborative manner.
Listeners, consider this carefully. The US is not losing power in an absolute sense, but its role is transitioning. Superpower status is being redefined. Instead of a world dominated by one nation, we see shared leadership, multipolar influence, and complex interdependencies. American strength remains unmatched in many areas, but success now depends on adaptability, collaboration, and vision, rather than unilateral dominance.
Ultimately, whether the U.S. retains its superpower status will depend on strategic choices in the next decades. Maintaining military, economic, technological, and cultural advantages is necessary but not sufficient. America must demonstrate credibility, strengthen alliances, invest in innovation, and act with foresight in an increasingly multipolar and interconnected world. Leadership today is as much about influence and perception as it is about raw power.
So, dear listeners, the takeaway is nuanced. The United States is not collapsing or losing all its influence. It is navigating a world where power is more distributed, challenges are more complex, and leadership requires balance, vision, and cooperation. Superpower status in the 21st century is less about dominance and more about shaping global outcomes responsibly, effectively, and collaboratively.
We want to hear from you, our listeners. Do you think the U.S. will maintain its superpower role in the coming decades, or will other countries take the lead? How do you see America's influence from where you are listening? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. Your perspective helps us understand how the world perceives global power today.
Thank you for joining us on the English Globe for this in-depth exploration of US superpower status. We hope this discussion has provided clarity and insight into the complexities of global influence. Remember, power is not fixed, and the future depends on choices, strategies, and adaptability. Stay curious, stay informed, and we will continue to explore the forces shaping our world in our future podcasts.